There is a certain kind of breaking that is not a shattering, but a hollowing out. It leaves the shell intact, pristine to the careless eye, while the inside is nothing but a cavern of echoes. I learned this the day my world ended. The day Jorik, my mate, the future alpha of the Black Moon Pack, stood before the council and declared me unclean. His voice, once a velvet murmur against my skin, became a blade that carved me from the life I knew. He pointed a trembling, righteous finger at my belly, where our child grew, a secret warmth only I could feel. "This is not Pack," he'd snarled, his beautiful face twisted into a mask of disgust. "It is a curse, a blight. Her weakness has tainted my seed." My weakness? The silver scar that traced a jagged path from my left temple to my jaw, a relic of a rogue attack in my youth that had left my wolf form slightly smaller, my senses a fraction duller than the others. It had never mattered to him before. He'd called it my moonlight mark, kissing it under the stars. Now it was the brand of my damnation. The alpha, his father, a hard man with eyes like chips of flint, had sealed my fate with a single, guttural word. Exile. They did not kill me. That would have been a mercy. Instead, they cast me out into the unforgiving chill of the Whisperwood, a vast haunted wilderness that bordered our territory. They gave me nothing but the clothes on my back and the shame burning in my chest. Pregnant. Alone. Broken. The first week was a blur of stumbling flight, driven by a primal terror that gnawed at my heels. Every rustle of leaves was a predator, every shadow a phantom of my former pack coming to finish the job. My wolf, a pale, ghost-like creature named Lyra, was a whimper in my soul, her spirit crushed by the rejection of her pack, her mate. She wanted to lie down and let the forest take us, to surrender to the cold. But the tiny, persistent flutter deep within me would not allow it. A life depended on me, Jorik's child, our child. I had to survive. I found a shallow cave carved into the base of a granite cliff, sheltered by ancient pines whose needles carpeted the ground, muffling sound and scent. It became my world, my prison, my sanctuary. The hollowing inside me was a constant ache, a phantom limb where my pack bond used to be. Sometimes at night I'd press my hand to my stomach and weep, not for myself, but for the innocent life I'd brought into this desolation. What kind of mother was I to offer a world of stone and silence? The hunger was a physical pain, a twisting knot that mirrored the one in my heart. I learned to forage, my hands raw from digging for roots, my tongue stained with the bitter juice of unfamiliar berries. I set clumsy snares, more often than not finding them empty in the morning. Lyra, weak as she was, helped. She could scent the small, scurrying things I could not, her ghostly fur blending with the morning mist as she hunted rabbits and squirrels. We were a pathetic pair, the scarred outcast and her spectral wolf, fighting for scraps at the edge of the world. Loneliness was a different kind of predator, silent and suffocating. It crept in during the long, dark hours before dawn, whispering Yorick's accusations in my ear. Unclean, tainted, weak. I would curl into a tight ball, my arms wrapped around my growing belly, and try to remember the man who had loved me. But his face would blur, replaced by the stranger with cold fury in his eyes. He had held my heart in his hands and crushed it to dust. And for what? For a scar? For a fear that our child would inherit my perceived imperfection? The hollowness ached, a vast empty space where love and belonging used to reside. I was nothing, a ghost haunting the woods, waiting to fade completely. But then, a kick, a small, insistent nudge from within, a reminder. I was not nothing. I was a mother, and for the tiny, perfect life I carried, I would become a monster. I would fight the forest, the hunger, the ghosts of my past. I would claw my way back to life, one ragged breath at a time. The shell might be hollowed out, but it would not break. It could not. The seasons turned with a brutal indifference. The vibrant greens of summer bled into the fiery riot of autumn, then faded to the stark skeletal gray of winter. The world became a canvas of white and shadow, and the cold was a physical entity, a beast with teeth of ice that sought to gnaw its way into my bones. My pregnancy advanced, my body growing heavy and clumsy, my movements slow. The cave, once a simple shelter, became my fortress. I spent weeks weaving pine boughs and mud into the entrance, creating a thick, insulated barrier against the wind, leaving only a small opening to slip through. The fear for my unborn child was a constant, frantic hum beneath my skin. Every stumble, every pang of hunger, every shiver that racked my body felt like a failure, a betrayal of the life I was supposed to protect. Lyra, my wolf, seemed to draw strength from my growing desperation. Her hunts became more successful, her senses sharpened by necessity. She would return to the cave, a rabbit dangling from her jaws, and drop it at my feet, her pale eyes glowing with a fierce, protective light. We were a pack of two, bound not by ceremony or law, but by a shared will to endure. The first snows fell, thick and silent, blanketing the forest in a profound hush. The world outside my cave became a dangerous, alien landscape. I survived on Lyra's kills and the small store of dried berries and roots I had managed to gather. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of sleeping, eating what little I had, and feeding the small fire that was my only source of warmth. I talked to my baby, my voice a hoarse whisper in the confines of the den. I told him stories of the sun, of the pack I once loved, editing out the betrayal, creating a fairy tale I knew he would never experience. I named him Finn. It meant fair warrior. Kieo. Prayer for a strength I feared I could not give him. The labor came on a night when the wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the pine boughs of my makeshift door. It was a savage, elemental pain, tearing through me with a ferocity that left no room for thought or fear. There was only the roaring in my ears and the primal, desperate need to bring my son into the world. I was utterly alone, my only companion the flickering shadows thrown by the fire. I screamed until my throat was raw, my hands gripping the frozen earth of the cave floor. It was a battle fought in darkness and agony, a brutal, solitary rite of passage. And then, silence. The wind died down. The pain receded into a dull, throbbing ache. And in the sudden, profound quiet, I heard it. A cry. Thin, reedy, but utterly perfect. He was here. Finn. I gathered him to my chest, my movements clumsy with exhaustion. He was so small, so fragile, his tiny body impossibly warm against my cold skin. He had a dusting of silver-white hair, the color of moonlight on snow, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep, stormy gray of a winter sky. I looked at his perfect face, his tiny, grasping fingers, and the hollowness inside me, the vast cavern of grief and loss, was suddenly, miraculously filled. It was filled with a love so fierce, so absolute, it stole my breath. This tiny creature was my pack. He was my purpose. He was my world. In that moment, Yorish, the Black Moon Pack, the exile, it all faded into insignificance. They had taken everything from me, but they had given me him. I cleaned him as best I could with a piece of my tunic and the melted snow I kept by the fire. I held him to my breast, and when he latched on, a wave of profound peace washed over me. We were alive. We had survived. The first weeks of Finn's life were a dream of exhaustion and adoration. I rarely slept, content to watch the gentle rise and fall of his chest, to trace the delicate shell of his ear, to breathe in his sweet, milky scent. Lyra was a silent, ghostly guardian. She would lie at the entrance of the cave, a pale sentinel, her ears constantly swiveling, her nose testing the wind for any hint of danger. She seemed to understand the preciousness of the life we now protected. It was when Finn was a month old that I first noticed something was different. Not wrong, just different. The squirrels and birds, usually skittish, would venture close to the cave entrance, their heads cocked as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. One afternoon, a doe and her fawn stood just beyond the tree line, their dark, liquid eyes fixed on our den, not with fear, but with a strange, placid curiosity. I dismissed it as a quirk of the isolated wilderness, but then came the wolf. I smelled him before I saw him. The scent was unlike any I had ever known, not the familiar, earthy musk of my old pack, but something wilder, older. It smelled of ozone after a lightning strike, of ancient forests and cold, starlit peaks. Was a scent of immense power, of unquestionable authority. Primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm haze of new motherhood. I snatched Finn to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs, and backed into the deepest shadows of the cave. Lyra materialized at my side, a low, guttural growl vibrating in her chest. She was terrified. I could feel her fear as if it were my own, but she stood her ground, a fragile, ghostly shield between my son and the approaching danger. Through the small gap in my woven door, I saw him. He was enormous, a creature of midnight and shadow, his fur the color of polished jet. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his size, each step silent and deliberate. He wasn't a rogue. Rogues were feral, mad with isolation, their movements jerky and unpredictable. This wolf was controlled, intelligent. He was something else entirely. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, 100 feet from my den, and raised his head, testing the air. His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to glow with an internal silver light. They scanned the forest, missing nothing, and I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that he knew we were here. He knew. He didn't approach. He simply sat on his haunches, a silent obsidian statue against the snow, and watched. For hours. He did not move, did not make a sound. He just watched our cave with an unnerving, focused intensity. The sun began to set, painting the snow in hues of rose and violet, and still he remained. My fear began to curdle into a strange, exhausted confusion. A predator would have attacked. A curious wolf would have moved on. What did this one want? Just before full darkness fell, he stood, gave our cave one last long look, and melted back into the trees as silently as he had appeared. I didn't sleep that night. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind was him returning. But he did not. The next morning, I found a freshly killed deer lying in the clearing, its neck broken cleanly. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood staining the snow other than a small pool beneath its head. And there was only one set of tracks leading away from the carcass, the massive paw prints of the black wolf. My mind reeled. It was a gift, an offering. But why? Was it a trap? A way to lure me out? I was starving. My milk was thinning, and Finn had been fussy and hungry all night. I stared at the deer, my stomach cramping with need, my mind a battlefield of suspicion and desperation. In the end, my son's needs won. I dragged the carcass into the cave, my muscles screaming with the effort, and I feasted. The rich, warm meat was life itself, and I felt strength flowing back into my limbs. That night, my milk was plentiful, and Finn slept soundly, his belly full. The black wolf became a silent, constant presence at the edge of our lives. He never came closer, never showed himself for long, but I knew he was there. I would catch a glimpse of his dark form moving between the trees, or I would find another offering of food left in the clearing. a brace of rabbits, a fat grouse. He was keeping us alive. I began to lose my fear of him, replacing it with a profound and unsettling curiosity. Who was he? Why was he helping us? A lone wolf, especially one of his power, would not waste energy on a weak outcast and her pup unless he had a reason. Perhaps he was lonely, a fellow exile. Perhaps he saw a kinship in our shared solitude. I started to talk to him, my voice soft, carrying on the wind. I told him about my exile, about Finn. I didn't know if he could understand, but the act of speaking the words aloud to someone, even a silent, shadowy wolf, was a balm to my soul. I gave him a name, Kale. It meant mighty warrior, a name to match his powerful presence. One day, as I sat at the mouth of the cave nursing Finn, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Kale was there. Not in the clearing, but at the entrance to my den, closer than he had ever been. He was in his human form. He was the most beautiful and terrifying man I had ever seen. He stood tall and broad, filling the entrance of the cave and blocking out the winter light. He was dressed in simple, dark leathers, worn and practical, but they did little to disguise the raw power that emanated from him like heat from a forge. His hair was as black as his wolf's pelt, long and unbound, falling around a face that was all sharp angles and severe planes. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were the same eyes from the wolf, a startling, luminous silver that seemed to see right through me, peeling back the layers of fear and grime to the shattered pieces of my soul. He said nothing, simply watched me, his expression unreadable. My first instinct was to scream, to shift, to do something, anything, to protect Finn. But Lyra was silent within me, not cowering, but still. Watching. Waiting. And Finn, my sweet Finn, did not cry. He turned his head from my breast and looked up at the stranger, his own stormy gray eyes wide with a strange, fearless curiosity. A tiny, gurgling sound escaped his lips. The man's silver eyes flickered down to my son, and the harsh lines of his face softened, just for a moment. The change was so subtle I might have imagined it, but it was enough to quell the immediate panic in my chest. He took a slow, deliberate step into the cave. I flinched, pulling Finn tighter against me. "Do not be afraid," he said. His voice was a low, deep rumble like stones shifting in a riverbed. It was a voice that held ancient authority, a voice used to being obeyed without question. "I will not harm you, or the child." He crouched down, moving with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing, until he was at eye level with me. The sheer proximity of him was overwhelming. The air crackled with his power, and the scent I had come to associate with his wolf form, ozone and ancient forests, was even stronger now, clean and intoxicating. He looked at Finn, who was still staring at him, one tiny hand waving in the air. "He is strong," the man said, his gaze fixed on my son. "His scent. It is a song I have not heard in 1,000 years." I didn't understand what he meant, but the reverence in his tone was unmistakable. He wasn't looking at Finn like a predator. He was looking at him with something that bordered on awe. "Who are you?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "My name is Kale," he replied, his silver eyes lifting to meet mine. My heart skipped a beat. The name I had given him. A coincidence. It had to be. "Why are you helping us?" "I protect what is mine to protect," he said, the words cryptic and heavy with unspoken meaning. "This is my land. You and your son are under my care." His land? The Whisperwood was unclaimed territory, a buffer zone between the packs, too wild and dangerous for any to settle. No one ruled here. "There is no alpha in these woods," I said, a sliver of my old pack-bred defiance returning. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. There is. You just never knew to look. He reached out a hand, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me time to react. I tensed, but he didn't touch me. His fingers went to a loose strand of my matted hair, tucking it gently behind my ear. His touch was brief, fleeting, but it sent a jolt of warmth through me that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the first gentle human touch I had felt in almost a year. It undid me. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry pricked at my eyes. He saw them, and a flicker of something, pain, regret, empathy, crossed his face. He withdrew his hand. "The pack that did this to you," he said, his voice hardening, the deep rumble turning to granite. "They will answer for it." "You don't know anything about it," I retorted, wiping angrily at my wet cheeks. "I know they cast out a mother and her unborn child to die in the winter," he said, his silver eyes blazing with a cold fire. "That is all I need to know." He stayed for a while longer, sitting in silence by my fire, a powerful, brooding guardian. He did not ask questions, did not push for answers. He simply shared my space, his presence a strange comfort. When he left, as silently as he'd arrived, the cave felt colder, emptier. The encounter left me shaken, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, burgeoning hope. He was a protector, that much was clear, but he was also a mystery, a man of immense power and hidden purpose. And for some reason, he had tied his purpose to me and my son. A part of me, the part that had been broken and hollowed out, warned me not to trust him, that no one offered kindness without a price. But another part, the part that had been awakened by my son's birth, felt an undeniable pull toward the man with silver eyes. A sense of recognition, a feeling as old and deep as the bones of the earth. It was the faint, whispered call of a bond I never thought I would feel again. The dynamic of our strange, silent coexistence shifted after that day. Kale no longer remained a shadow in the trees. He would appear at the cave, sometimes in his magnificent wolf form, other times as the intense, quiet man with silver eyes. He never stayed long, and our conversations were sparse, freighted with unspoken questions. He would bring food, mend the crumbling parts of my shelter with a skill that spoke of long practice, and sometimes he would simply sit and watch Finn with that same look of profound, reverent awe. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight softening of his jaw when Finn would smile, the tightening around his eyes when he looked at my scarred face. He never asked about the scar, but I felt his gaze on it often, a touch as real as a physical caress, filled not with pity or disgust, but with a quiet, simmering anger directed at those who had given it to me. My trust in him grew slowly, a fragile green shoot pushing its way through frozen ground. It wasn't a conscious decision, but an instinctual one. Lyra, my wolf, was calm in his presence, her spirit no longer cowering but resting, as if in the presence of a great and benevolent power. Finn adored him. Whenever Kale appeared, my son's face would break into a gummy, ecstatic smile, his little arms and legs pumping with excitement. Kale would sometimes pick him up, his large, calloused hands impossibly gentle as they held my tiny son. He would murmur to him in a low, ancient tongue I didn't recognize, the sounds like the whisper of wind through pines, and Finn would grow quiet, his gray eyes fixed on Kale's face, as if he understood every word. One afternoon, a sudden violent blizzard descended upon the forest, a maelstrom of wind and blinding snow. It came without warning, turning the world outside my cave into a churning white chaos. I had been out gathering firewood, and the storm caught me, disorienting me within moments. The cold was a physical blow, stealing my breath, and panic began to set in. I couldn't find my way back. Finn was alone in the cave. just as a wave of despair threatened to pull me under. A wall of black fur slammed into my side, knocking me into the snow, but also shielding me from the worst of the wind. It was Kale. He nudged me with his great head, his silver eyes glowing in the gloom, and then he lay down, curling his massive body around me, a living bulwark against the storm. The heat from his body was a life-saving furnace. I buried my face in his thick, dark fur, which smelled of pine and cold stone, and clung to him as the blizzard raged. He didn't move until the worst of the storm had passed hours later, his steady heartbeat a comforting drum against my ear. When the wind finally died down, he led me back to the cave, his body a constant, reassuring presence at my side. Finn was safe, sleeping soundly by the fire. Kale shifted back to his human form just inside the entrance, shaking the snow from his black hair. He was bleeding. A long, deep gash ran along his forearm, the edges raw and angry. "You're hurt," I gasped, rushing to his side. He glanced down at it, his expression dismissive. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing," I insisted, my voice sharp with a fear that surprised me. I tore a strip from the hem of my tunic, the fabric thin and worn, and gently took his arm. He stiffened at my touch, his muscles cording beneath my fingers, but he did not pull away. The wound was deep, deeper than it should have been from a simple fall. "What happened?" "A bear," he said, his voice flat. "It was tracking you. It saw you as easy prey in the storm." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just found me in the blizzard. He had been protecting me. He had fought a bear for me. I cleaned the wound with snowmelt, my touch as gentle as I could make it. His skin was warm, alive. I was acutely aware of the strength in his arm, the power held in check beneath my hands. Our proximity in the small cave was intense, the air thick with unspoken emotions. His silver eyes watched my every move, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "Why?" I whispered, my gaze fixed on the task of bandaging his arm. "Why do you do this? Why do you protect us?" He was silent for a long moment. I dared to look up at him. His expression was unguarded, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. "Years ago," he began, his voice low and rough with memory, "I failed to protect someone. I lost my mate, and our unborn child. To a betrayal from within my own council. I was too arrogant, too trusting. I swore I would never let such weakness rule me again. I built walls of stone and silence around myself." My heart ached for him. The immense, lonely power he projected was a shield, hiding a wound as deep as my own. "When I felt the birth of your son," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "it was like a light being kindled in a world of darkness, his life force. It called to something ancient and dormant in my own blood. I came expecting to find a threat to my lands. Instead, I found you. I saw your strength, your courage. I saw the pack that cast you out for a scar, and I saw the queen they were too blind to see." My breath hitched. "Queen? I don't understand." "You will," he promised, his silver eyes intense. He reached up with his uninjured hand and gently, reverently, traced the line of my scar with his thumb. I flinched, expecting the familiar sting of shame, but his touch held no judgment. It was tender, almost worshipful. "This is not a mark of weakness, Alara," he murmured, speaking my name for the first time. It sounded like a prayer on his lips. "It is a testament to your survival. It is a map of your strength. They threw you away like a broken thing, but they were wrong. You are not broken. You are magnificent." The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, shattered the last of my defenses. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, and he caught it with his thumb, his touch, searing my skin. In that moment, something profound shifted between us. The fragile shoot of trust blossomed into something deeper, more powerful. It was a connection that ran soul deep, a recognition of shared pain, shared survival, and a future that was suddenly, terrifyingly, full of possibility. The blizzard had passed, but a storm of a different kind was just beginning inside me. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet healing. The physical wounds from the bear attack on Kale faded quickly, his shifter biology knitting flesh and bone with supernatural speed. But the other wounds, the ones we both carried deep inside, began to mend in the shared space of my small cave. We spoke more, not of the past and its pain, but of the future, of Finn. Kale would tell me stories of the ancient wolves, of the magic that ran in the blood of the first alphas, a magic he claimed was awake and alive in my son. I would watch him with Finn, a gentle giant with a tiny silver-haired baby, and the sight would ache in my chest with a fierce, tender longing I refused to name. He was becoming the center of our small world, a fixed point of strength and safety. The love I felt for him was a terrifying, exhilarating thing, growing in the silence between our words, in the lingering glances, in the accidental brush of our hands. I knew he felt it too. I could see it in the way his silver eyes followed me, in the protective stance he took whenever I stepped out of the cave, in the way he said my name. His voice, a caress, but a shadow of fear always lingered. He was a man of secrets, of immense power, and I was me, the outcast, the scarred, broken wolf. How could I ever be worthy of a man like him? What place could there be for me and my son in his world, a world that was clearly so much larger than the Whisperwood? My old insecurities, Yorick's poisoned words, were ghosts that still whispered in the dark. One evening, as a warm Chinook wind melted the last of the snow, promising the arrival of spring, Kale arrived at the cave looking grim. The quiet peace we had cultivated shattered at the sight of his face. His jaw was set like granite, and his silver eyes were cold with fury. "What is it?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound with a familiar dread. "Hunters," he said, his voice a low growl. "They've crossed the border into my lands, scent markers of the Black Moon Pack." Black Moon. Jorik's pack. My old pack. The blood drained from my face. My hand went instinctively to Finn, who was sleeping in his makeshift crib of moss and fur. "Why are they here?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. They were looking for me. "They are hunting," Kale said, his fists clenching at his sides. "And their scent is focused. They are tracking you." "But why now? After all this time?" "Packs like theirs are built on strength and superstition," he explained, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "Your exile, the loss of a new pup. It would be seen as a sign of weakness, a curse. The winter must have been hard on them. Sickness, failed hunts. Their alpha is likely losing his grip. They are desperate. They've convinced themselves that the child they cast out is the key to restoring their power." He was right. I remembered the old legends, the prophecies of a pup born under a winter moon who would usher in an age of prosperity. Jorik had scoffed at them, but his father was a firm believer. They didn't want Finn out of love. They wanted him as a symbol, a tool to reclaim their dominance. A wave of nauseating fury washed over me. They would not have him. I would die before I let those hypocrites lay a hand on my son. "They will not find us," Kale said, his voice a vow of absolute certainty. "This forest answers to me. Its paths will confuse them, its scents will mislead them. But they are persistent. We need to move." The thought of leaving the cave, the only home Finn had ever known, was terrifying. But the thought of Yorick finding us was infinitely worse. We packed what little I owned: a few furs, a sharpened stone I used as a knife, the worn clothes on my back. Kale lifted a sleeping Finn into his arms, wrapping him securely against his chest. As I took one last look at the small, smoky cave that had been our sanctuary, a profound sadness washed over me. It was a place of pain and solitude, but it was also the place where I had become a mother, where I had met Kyle. He seemed to sense my turmoil. He came to my side, his presence a solid wall of comfort. "This is not an ending, Ilara," he said softly. "It is a beginning." He led me deeper into the Whisperwood, to territories I had never dared to explore. The forest seemed to change around him. Paths that had been blocked by fallen trees were suddenly clear. Thorny brambles seemed to part for us. The woods were not just his home. They were an extension of his will. He took us to a hidden waterfall that cascaded into a crystal-clear pool, its roar masking a deep, dry cave system behind the veil of water. It was defensible, hidden, and beautiful. "We will be safe here," he said, laying Finn down gently on a bed of soft furs he had prepared. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that we might truly escape my past. But the past was relentless. A few days later, as I was gathering herbs near the waterfall, I heard them. Voices, the sharp, barking commands of a pack hunt. My blood turned to ice. They had found us. I scrambled back towards the cave, my heart in my throat. Kyle was already there, standing at the entrance behind the waterfall, his body tense, his silver eyes fixed on the forest beyond. He had heard them too. "Stay inside. Do not make a sound," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. I retreated into the darkness of the cave, my arms wrapped around Finn, who had started to fuss, sensing my terror. I tried to soothe him, my hands trembling. Outside, the voices grew closer. I could hear the crunch of their boots on the forest floor. I could smell them. The familiar, hated scent of the Black Moon Pack. And among them, one scent stood out, turning my stomach with a visceral memory of love and betrayal. Jorik. He was here. "Ilara, I know you're in there." Jorik's voice cut through the roar of the waterfall, sharp and arrogant. The sound of it, once my greatest comfort, now felt like a violation. It scraped against my raw nerves, a bitter reminder of everything I had lost and everything I had since found. I huddled deeper in the cave, shielding Finn with my body, my breath coming in shallow, silent gasps. Kale stood like a statue of vengeance just inside the curtain of water, a silhouette of contained fury. "Come out, Ilara!" Jorik called again, his tone laced with a false, wheedling gentleness that was more insulting than his anger. "It's time to come home. We were wrong. The pack needs you. We need the boy." The boy. Not our son, not your child. A commodity. A tool. The rage that had been simmering inside me for months boiled over, hot and cleansing. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my belly, but the anger was stronger. Lyra paced within me, a phantom of fury, her spectral hackles raised. She was no longer the broken, whimpering thing that had fled into the woods. She was a mother protecting her cub. "Stay here," Kale murmured, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the stone floor. He didn't look back at me, but I felt the weight of his command, the promise of protection within it. He stepped through the waterfall, emerging on the other side like a god of the forest, water streaming from his black hair and leathers. He stood on the mossy bank, his powerful form radiating an aura of pure, undiluted authority that made the air itself seem to thin. From my hiding place, I could see them. Jorik stood at the front, flanked by 3 of his father's most loyal enforcers. He looked thinner, his handsome face etched with lines of strain and frustration. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, a thin veneer over a core of desperation. When he saw Kale, he faltered, his confident smirk slipping. He had clearly expected to find a lone, starving outcast, not this formidable, intimidating stranger. "Who the hell are you?" Yorick demanded, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of dominance. This is pack business. Step aside. You are on my land, Kyle stated, his voice calm but carrying an echo of immense power that made the other wolves shift uneasily. You are the one who will step aside. Leave now, and I may let you keep your lives. Jorik laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your land? This is the Whisperwood. It belongs to no one. We're here for what is ours. We're here for my son. At the claim, a possessive, animalistic growl tore from Kale's chest. It was a sound of pure, primal rage, a promise of violence so profound that Yorick and his men took an involuntary step back. You have no son, Kale snarled, his silver eyes blazing with contempt. You forfeited that right when you cast him out to die with his mother. Yorick's face flushed with anger. She is a tainted, weakened wolf. Her scar is a mark of her curse. She poisoned my seed, but the elders believe the boy can be cleansed, that he can still save us. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of his words stole my breath. He admitted it. He admitted he'd thrown us away because of a superstition, and now wanted to steal my son to fix his pack's problems. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. Clutching a sleeping fin to my chest, I stepped out from behind the waterfall, blinking in the dappled sunlight. My clothes were rags, my hair was a tangled mess, but I stood tall, my chin lifted. I am not tainted, Yorick, I said, my voice shaking but clear. I am a survivor, and you will never touch my son. Yorick's eyes widened when he saw me, then narrowed with a possessive gleam as his gaze fell on Finn. Ilara, there you are. Stop this foolishness. You belong to me. The boy belongs to the pack. We belong to no one, I retorted, taking my place at Kale's side. I felt the heat of his body, the solid strength of his presence, and it bolstered my courage. Especially not to you. Jorik's father, Alpha Marcus, pushed his way through the enforcers. He was older, grayer, but his flint-like eyes were as hard as ever. Enough of this, he boomed, his alpha voice rolling through the clearing. It was a command meant to force submission, a power I had once trembled before. Now it washed over me, and I felt nothing but contempt. Give us the pup, girl. He carries the blood of my line. He is our future. His future is not with you, Kale said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me and Finn, a living shield. You speak of bloodlines, Marcus. You are a fool. You wallow in your own ignorance, clinging to diluted power while blind to the truth before you. And what truth is that, stranger? Marcus sneered. The truth of who this child is, Kale said, his voice ringing with a power that made the leaves on the trees tremble. And the truth of who I am. In the space of a heartbeat, he changed. It wasn't the chaotic, painful shift of a normal wolf. It was a transformation, a fluid unfolding of power. His form expanded, his skin giving way to midnight fur, his human features melting into the noble, terrifying visage of his wolf. But he was larger than before, impossibly large, his head level with Marcus's chest. A faint silver light pulsed around him, an aura of ancient, untamable magic. The black moon wolves fell back, their eyes wide with terror. They were looking at a creature of legend. I am Kale, he roared, his voice a blend of man and beast, a sound that shook the very stones beneath their feet. Alpha of alphas, king of all packs, and this land you trespass upon is the heart of my kingdom. The world seemed to stop. Alpha King. The title was a myth, a legend whispered by elders around a fire, a story of a time when all wolves were united under one supreme ruler. It wasn't supposed to be real. Marcus stared, his face ashen, his jaw slack with disbelief and dawning horror. Jorik looked as if he'd been turned to stone. They were trespassing on the Alpha King's personal domain, threatening the woman and child under his direct protection. They had signed their own death warrants. Kale turned his massive, regal head, his luminous silver eyes meeting mine. In them, I saw no rage, only a fierce, unwavering devotion. Then he looked at Finn, sleeping peacefully in my arms, oblivious to the momentous shift in our world. "And this pup," Kale's voice boomed, echoing through the silent, terrified clearing, "is no curse. He is a gift from the moon goddess herself. He carries the blood of the first wolf, a line you thought was lost to time, and I claim him. Before the spirits of this forest and the goddess herself, I claim this child as my own. He is my son. He is the heir to my throne." The silence that followed Kale's declaration was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket broken only by the rush of the waterfall. Yorick and his father stood frozen, their faces a mask of utter shock and terror. The Alpha King, a figure of myth and legend, made flesh and fury before them. And he had just claimed me. He had claimed my son. My mind struggled to process the reality of it. Kale, the quiet, brooding protector of my exile, was the supreme ruler of our entire species. The thought was so immense, so world-altering, that I felt dizzy. He wasn't just an alpha, he was the alpha. The power that radiated from him was not just strength, it was sovereignty. He turned his great wolf head back toward the intruders, the silver light around him seeming to brighten, to pulse with his authority. "You came to these woods to steal a child you deemed unworthy," Kale's voice thundered, each word a hammer blow of judgment. "You cast out the mother, a shifter of a purer bloodline than any of you have seen in 1,000 years, because you were too ignorant to recognize her worth. Her weakness was a sign of her ancient lineage, a bloodline that does not seek dominance through brute force, but through a deeper connection to the magic of this world." He looked directly at Marcus. "You, Alpha of the Black Moon Pack, have failed. You have failed your pack. You have failed your ancestors. And you have failed the laws of the goddess. You allowed your pride and your superstition to blind you. For this, you will be stripped of your rank. Your pack will be broken, its members scattered to the four winds to seek forgiveness and acceptance from packs who are worthy." Marcus let out a choked sound, a strangled gasp of protest, but no words came out. His power, his entire world, had been dismantled in a single breath. Kale then fixed his terrible, luminous gaze on Yorick. My former mate was trembling, his handsome face pale and slick with sweat. The brittle arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic primal fear. "And you," Kale snarled, the sound ripping through the air. "You rejected your mate. You abandoned your own son. You are a coward and a traitor to your own blood. You are less than a rogue. You are nothing." He took a single, deliberate step forward. Yorick fell to his knees in the dirt, his head bowed. "Mercy, my king," he whimpered, the words barely audible. "Please." Kale stared down at the groveling form of the man who had shattered my life. I watched, my heart a painful, erratic drum in my chest, Finn still sleeping soundly against me. A part of me, the wounded, vengeful part, wanted Kale to destroy him. But as I looked at Yorick, I felt nothing but a hollow sort of pity. He was small. He was weak. He was already destroyed. Kyle seemed to sense my thoughts. He glanced back at me, a silent question in his silver eyes. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Killing him would change nothing. His punishment was to live with what he had done, with what he had lost. Kyle seemed to accept my verdict. He turned back to Yorick. "There will be no mercy for you," he said, his voice cold and final. "But I will not grant you a warrior's death. You will be exiled, stripped of your wolf. You will live out your days as a human, with the full memory of the power and the family you threw away. You will wander the world alone, and every day you will remember the son who is now a prince and the woman who is now a queen." He lifted his head and let out a howl. It was not a howl of aggression, but a call, a command. Within moments, the forest came alive. Wolves emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, their forms sleek and powerful, their eyes glowing with intelligence and loyalty. They were Kale's guard, his royal pack, and they had been here all along, watching, waiting. They surrounded the terrified black moon wolves, their silent presence more intimidating than any threat. "Take them away," Kale commanded. His guards moved with swift, silent efficiency, herding Marcus and his enforcers away like livestock. Two of the largest guards hauled a sobbing, broken Yorick to his feet and dragged him into the forest. And then they were gone. The clearing was quiet again. The sun filtered through the trees, dappling the mossy ground. It was over. All of it. The fear, the running, the ghosts of my past. They had been faced and vanquished. Kale shifted back into his human form, the transformation as smooth and silent as before. He stood before me, the powerful Alpha King, but all I could see was the man who had shared his warmth with me in a blizzard, who had tended my fire, who had looked at my son with such gentle awe. "Alara," he said, his voice soft now, stripped of its regal thunder. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between us, as if asking for permission. I leaned into his touch, my body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. His hand cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking the jagged line of my scar. His silver eyes were filled with a universe of emotions, regret, relief, and a love so profound it made my breath catch. "He called you a queen?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Am I?" "You have always been a queen," he murmured, his gaze intense, unwavering. "You were a queen when you survived the wilderness alone. You were a queen when you gave birth in a cold cave. You were a queen when you stood up to the fools who tried to break you. I am merely giving you the kingdom you deserve." The truth of his words settled over me, healing the last of the hollow, broken places inside me. He saw me. He had always seen me, not as the outcast, but as who I truly was. He had seen my strength when all I felt was weakness. I looked from his beautiful, earnest face down to the sleeping child in my arms. Our son, our heir, a prince. We were a family, a strange, impossible family forged in exile and secrecy, now revealed in a torrent of magic and power. It was a fairy tale I could never have imagined, more wonderful and terrifying than any I had whispered to Finn in the dark. The royal pack remained ghosts in the trees, their presence a silent, comforting perimeter as Kale led me and Finn away from the waterfall. He took us deeper into the heart of his domain, to a place where the magic of the forest was palpable, a living, breathing entity. Ancient trees so large their canopies formed a cathedral ceiling, allowed only slivers of sunlight to dapple the forest floor. The air was sweet with the scent of damp earth, moss, and 1,000 years of untamed life. At the center of this sacred grove stood a dwelling that was less a structure and more a part of the landscape itself. It was built into the side of a massive granite tor, its walls fashioned from living wood and stone, with a roof of green, living turf. It was a home that was alive, in perfect harmony with the world around it. This was Kale's heart, his true home, and he was sharing it with me. Inside, it was warm and spacious, the air filled with the scent of cedar and beeswax candles. Furs covered the smooth stone floors, and a fire crackled in a grand hearth carved from the tor itself. It was a place of power and peace, a sanctuary fit for a king. Kale led me to a chair by the fire and gently took Finn from my arms. My son, who had slept through the entire dramatic confrontation, chose that moment to wake up. He blinked his stormy gray eyes, looked up at Kale, and broke into a wide, happy smile, reaching a tiny hand up to touch the king's jaw. Kale's stern face softened completely, his silver eyes melting with an adoration that was breathtaking to witness. "He knows," Kale murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "He knows he is home." I watched them, my king and my son, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me, so potent it felt like I might break apart from the force of it. For so long, my world had been circumscribed by fear and survival. I had forgotten what it felt for feel safe, to feel loved, to feel home. In the days that followed, Kael, the Alpha King, showed me his world. He showed me the secret places of the forest, the ancient standing stones that pulsed with dormant power, the quiet glades where the rarest herbs grew. He introduced me to the wolves of his royal pack, not as a king presenting his consort, but as a man introducing his mate to his family. They were warriors, fierce and loyal, but they looked at me with respect, and at Finn with undisguised reverence. They accepted us without question. Kale was my mate. We hadn't performed the ceremony, hadn't spoken the words, but the bond between us was as real and tangible as the ground beneath my feet. It was in every shared glance, every lingering touch. It was in the way my soul settled in his presence, the way Lyra sang with joy whenever he was near. One evening, after we had put Finn to sleep in a crib carved from the heart of a fallen oak tree, Kale led me outside. The sky was a sweep of indigo velvet, littered with a spray of diamond-bright stars. A full moon hung overhead, bathing the sacred grove in its ethereal silver light. He took my hand, his large, warm fingers lacing through mine, and led me to the center of the grove. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low, serious rumble. He turned to face me, his silver eyes impossibly bright in the moonlight, reflecting the stars above. "What I said to your former pack, it was not just a proclamation of power, it was a vow, from my heart." He went down on one knee before me. The Alpha King, ruler of all wolves, knelt in the dirt at my feet. My breath caught in my throat. "I have lived for centuries, Ilara," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have felt the world change around me. But my own world has been gray, a kingdom without a heart, without a queen. I was hollow, just as you were. You and Finn. You filled a void I didn't even know was still there. You brought the light back into my life." He took my other hand, holding both of them in his strong, gentle grasp. "I am asking you, not as your king, but as your man, as the wolf who loves you more than life itself. Be my mate, be my queen, rule by my side. Let me spend the rest of my very long life proving that you are cherished, that you are worthy, that you are loved beyond measure." Tears streamed freely down my face, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming happiness. The girl who had been cast out for a scar was being offered a crown. The woman who thought she was broken was being told she was magnificent. "There is nothing to ask," I whispered. My voice choked with emotion. I knelt down in front of him, so we were face to face. "My heart has been yours since the first time I saw you, a black wolf watching over my cave." I reached up and cupped his face, my thumb tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Yes, Kale. I will be your mate. I will be your queen." He surged forward, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was both a tender promise and a fierce claiming. It was a kiss that sealed our bond, that rewrote our pasts and forged our future. It tasted of moonlight and ozone and a love that was as ancient and enduring as the stars above us. It was not a fairy tale ending, I knew. It was a beginning. A life of ruling, of responsibility, of raising a son who was destined for greatness lay ahead of us. There would be challenges, politics, and dangers I couldn't yet imagine. But as I held on to him, my king, my mate, my Kale, I knew that we would face it all together. The hollowness was gone forever, replaced by a love that was a kingdom in itself. I was no longer the exile. I was home.